Why does everyone act like swiping on dating apps while you're still together is such a crime? I thought modern relationships were supposed to be flexible, open, evolved. So why did he look so betrayed when I laughed and told him he was being paranoid? I didn't realize that one joke at a rooftop bar would unravel my marriage, my friends, and my reputation in ways I never imagined. I'm Leonora, though everyone calls me Nora, and I have always believed that honesty is the most important thing in any relationship, which is why I never saw anything wrong with keeping my options open when the person you are with has not made a real commitment after 7 years of being together. Owen and I met when I was 25 and he was 27, back when I was still working as a junior coordinator at a small marketing agency, and he was just starting to build his career in IT project management. And for a while, everything felt easy and comfortable, the kind of relationship where you do not have to think too hard because it just flows naturally from one day to the next. We moved in together after 2 years, and then Maeve came along when I was 26, a surprise that changed everything, but also made me realize how much of my life I was giving up without ever getting the security or recognition I deserved, because Owen never proposed, never even hinted at wanting to make things official. And after a while, I started to feel like I was just waiting around for something that was never going to happen. I loved Maeve more than anything in the world, and I worked hard to give her a good life, balancing my job as a social media coordinator with all the responsibilities of being a mother. But there were days when I looked at Owen and wondered if this was really all there was, if I was supposed to just accept a life where I did everything right and got nothing in return except stability, which is important, but not enough when you are only 32 and still young enough to want excitement and passion and the feeling that someone truly values you. Owen was a good father and a decent partner in many ways, reliable and calm, and always there when Maeve needed him. But he was also quiet and predictable, the kind of man who would rather stay home on a Friday night than go out and experience life. And over time, I started to feel like I was disappearing into a routine that made me invisible, as if my own desires and dreams did not matter because I had chosen to build a life with someone who could not see me the way I wanted to be seen. That evening on the riverside embankment was supposed to be a simple walk, nothing more than a chance to get out of the apartment and let Maeve run off some energy before bedtime, and Owen had suggested it because the weather was nice and the fog was just starting to roll in over the water, giving everything a soft, almost romantic glow that made the city feel quieter and more peaceful than usual. I sat down on one of the benches near the railing, the metal cold under my legs even through my jeans, and I pulled out my phone because I had been talking to someone new on Tinder, a guy named Jasper who was funny and interesting and made me feel like I was still attractive and worth pursuing. Not just a tired mother who spent her days managing social media campaigns and her nights putting a 6-year-old to bed. Owen was a few meters away throwing a small rubber ball for Maeve, and I could hear her laughing as she chased it toward the water's edge, her voice bright and clear in the cool evening air. And for a moment I thought about putting my phone away, but then I told myself that I had nothing to hide, that I was not doing anything wrong because Owen and I were not married, and if he had a problem with it, then he should have done something about it years ago, instead of just assuming I would wait forever. I scrolled through Jasper's profile again, looking at the photos of him at art galleries and rooftop bars, places that felt exciting and full of life, and I smiled to myself as I read his latest message, something flirty and light that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in a long time. Owen came back toward the bench, Maeve trailing behind him with the ball in her hand, and he glanced down at my phone, his expression unreadable at first, and then I saw something shift in his eyes, a kind of hurt that he tried to cover up by looking away quickly and asking Maeve if she was ready to head home. I did not close the app or hide what I was doing, because I have always believed that honesty means being open about who you are and what you want, and I said casually that I was just looking, just keeping my options open. And when Owen asked why I would do that in front of our daughter, I laughed and told him that Maeve was not paying attention, and besides, it was not like I was doing anything serious, just chatting with people and seeing what was out there. Owen did not argue with me there on the embankment, which was typical of him, always avoiding conflict and pretending that everything was fine when I knew he was upset. And we walked back to the apartment in silence, Maeve holding his hand and skipping every few steps, completely unaware of the tension between us. The ferry horn sounded in the distance, a low, mournful note that echoed across the water, and I remember thinking that it sounded lonely, though I pushed the thought away because I did not want to feel guilty about something that I believed was my right, my freedom to explore what I wanted without being judged or controlled by someone who could not even commit to me properly. When we got home, Maeve went straight to her room to play with her stuffed animals, and Owen sat down on the sofa, his hands folded in his lap, and he asked me in that quiet, careful voice of his why I was using a dating app when we were supposed to be building a life together, and I could hear the hurt in his tone even though he was trying to stay calm. I sat down across from him, my phone still in my hand, and I told him the truth, which was that I did not see why I should limit myself when he had never made it clear that he wanted something permanent. And I said that if he had really wanted to keep me, he would have proposed years ago instead of just assuming I would stick around out of convenience or obligation. I told him that I was not sneaking around, that I was being honest and upfront about the fact that I wanted more than what he was giving me. And I said that he should be grateful that I was not lying to him the way some people do, hiding things and pretending everything is perfect when it is not. Owen looked at me for a long time, and I could see something changing in his expression, a kind of distance settling in that I had not seen before. And he said quietly that he did not think honesty meant hurting someone just because you could, and that he did not understand why I would do this in public, in front of Maeve, in front of anyone who might see. I rolled my eyes and told him he was being too sensitive, that he was making a bigger deal out of this than it needed to be, and I said that if he could not handle the fact that I was still attractive to other people, then that was his problem, not mine. He did not respond, just stood up and went to put Maeve to bed, and I could hear him reading her a story in that soft, patient voice he always used with her. And I felt a flicker of something I did not want to name, something that felt uncomfortably close to guilt, but I pushed it down and told myself that I was doing nothing wrong, that I deserved to be happy, and that Owen needed to grow up and accept that the world had changed since his parents' generation. Later that night, after Maeve was asleep and the apartment was quiet, I lay in bed scrolling through social media, and my phone buzzed with a new message from Jasper, the preview lighting up the dark room with a soft glow, and I saw the words, "Tonight was perfect," followed by a winking emoji, and I felt a thrill of excitement, the kind that made me forget about Owen lying silently on the other side of the bed. I glanced over at him, expecting him to be asleep, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and I knew he had seen the notification, and for a moment I wondered if I should say something, explain or apologize or at least acknowledge what had just happened. But then I decided that I did not owe him an explanation, that I was allowed to live my life the way I wanted, and I turned away and closed my eyes, telling myself that everything would be fine, that Owen would get over it, and that I was simply being honest about who I was and what I needed. The next morning I woke up feeling lighter than I had in weeks, as if the conversation with Owen had somehow freed me from the weight of pretending that everything was fine when it clearly was not. And I got ready for work with a kind of energy that I had not felt in a long time, choosing a dress that made me feel confident and attractive, the kind of outfit that reminded me I was still young and desirable and not just someone's tired partner or overworked mother. Owen was already up when I came into the kitchen making breakfast for Maeve, and he barely looked at me as I poured my coffee, his silence heavy and deliberate in a way that would have bothered me before. But now I just found it irritating, because I had been honest with him, and he was choosing to sulk instead of accepting the reality of our situation. Maeve was eating her cereal at the table, swinging her legs and humming to herself, completely oblivious to the tension between us, and I kissed the top of her head before grabbing my bag and heading out the door, telling Owen I would be home late because I had a client presentation that might run long, which was not exactly true but also not entirely a lie, because I did have work to do. And besides, what I did with my time was my own business. I arrived at the office tower around 9, the lobby already busy with people checking in at the reception desk and waiting for the elevators, and I felt a familiar sense of satisfaction as I walked through the space, heels clicking on the polished floor, knowing that I looked good and that people noticed. Jasper had texted me earlier asking if I wanted to meet for coffee before my day got too busy, and I had agreed without hesitation because he was fun and charming and made me feel like I mattered in a way that Owen never seemed to anymore. And I told myself that meeting a friend for coffee was perfectly innocent, that there was nothing wrong with enjoying someone's company even if that person happened to be attractive and interested in me. I found him waiting near the atrium, sitting at one of the small tables with 2 cups already ordered. And he stood up when he saw me, smiling in that easy, confident way that always made my heart beat a little faster. And we sat down together, leaning close over his tablet as he showed me some design work he was doing for a mutual client, our heads nearly touching as we scrolled through the images. I did not notice Claudia at first, did not see her standing by the elevator bank with her arms full of folders, watching us with an expression I would not have been able to read even if I had been paying attention, because I was too focused on Jasper and the way he made me laugh, the way his attention felt like sunlight after months of cold, grey routine. We talked for almost half an hour, and at some point his hand brushed mine on the table, just a brief touch that could have been an accident, but felt deliberate. And I did not pull away because I liked the feeling, liked the idea that someone wanted to touch me, wanted to be close to me. And I told myself that Owen had no right to be upset about any of this because he had never made me feel this way, had never made the effort to remind me that I was worth pursuing. When Jasper finally had to leave for another meeting, he squeezed my hand and said he hoped we could do this again soon. And I said yes, without thinking, without worrying about what it meant or where it might lead, because in that moment I felt alive and seen and valuable. And those feelings were more important to me than any vague sense of obligation to a man who had never bothered to marry me. I went up to my floor feeling exhilarated, ready to tackle my work with the kind of focus and energy that only comes when you feel good about yourself. But Claudia was waiting by my desk when I arrived, her expression serious and uncomfortable in a way that immediately put me on edge. She asked if we could talk privately, and I followed her into one of the small conference rooms, annoyed but trying to hide it because Claudia was my closest friend at work, and I did not want to seem defensive or guilty when I had nothing to feel guilty about. She closed the door and turned to me, her voice gentle but firm, and she said she had seen me with Jasper in the lobby, and she wanted to know if everything was okay at home, if there was something I needed to talk about. And I felt a flash of anger rise up in me because I knew what she was really asking, knew that she was judging me the way everyone seemed to judge women who refused to settle for less than they deserved. I told her that Jasper was just a friend, that we worked on some of the same campaigns, and it was completely normal for us to meet and collaborate. And I said that people needed to stop making assumptions about my life when they did not know the full story, did not understand what it was like to be with someone who took you for granted and never made you feel special or appreciated. Claudia looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the concern in her eyes, but also something else, something that looked like disappointment. And she said quietly that she was not judging me, that she just wanted to make sure I was thinking about what I was doing and what it might cost, and I laughed and told her that I was an adult and I could make my own decisions without needing her approval or anyone else's. She did not say anything more after that, just nodded and left the room, and I went back to my desk feeling vindicated but also strangely unsettled, because some part of me knew that Claudia was right, that what I was doing was crossing lines that might be hard to uncross. But I pushed that thought away and focused on my work, telling myself that I was simply living my life on my own terms, and that anyone who had a problem with that could keep their opinions to themselves. That evening, I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because going home meant facing Owen's silence and Maeve's innocent questions, and I was not ready for that yet. So I sat at my desk, scrolling through social media and answering messages from Jasper, who was funny and attentive in a way that made me feel desired. And by the time I finally packed up my things and headed home, it was after 9, the city dark and quiet as I walked to the parking garage. When I got back to the apartment building, I rode the elevator up to our floor, and as the doors opened, I saw Mr. Rains, our elderly neighbour from down the hall, standing by his door with his keys in his hand, and he looked at me with an expression that was hard to read, polite but distant, and he nodded once before disappearing into his apartment. And I thought nothing of it at the time because Mr. Rains had always been quiet and reserved, the kind of person who kept to himself and did not get involved in other people's business. I let myself into the apartment and found Owen in the living room, sitting on the sofa with his laptop open, and he looked up when I came in, his face carefully neutral, and he asked if I had a good day. And I said yes, everything was fine. And I went to check on Maeve, who was already asleep in her room, her stuffed animals arranged carefully around her pillow. When I came back out, Owen was still on the sofa, and he asked in that same calm, measured voice if anyone had stopped by the apartment that evening, and I felt a tiny spike of panic that I quickly covered with confusion, asking him why he would ask that. And he said that Mr. Rains had mentioned seeing someone leaving our place earlier, and I laughed and said that Mr. Rains must have been mistaken, that I had been at work all night and no one had been here. And Owen just nodded slowly, his eyes on his laptop screen, and he did not ask anything more, but the silence between us felt heavier than any accusation. The next morning, Mr. Rains was waiting in the hallway when Owen left for work, and I watched through the peephole as the older man stopped him near the elevator, speaking quietly. And though I could not hear what was being said, I saw Owen's jaw tighten, saw him nod once and shake Mr. Rains's hand, and when he came back inside to grab something he had forgotten, I asked him what that was about, and he said that Mr. Rains had just been making small talk, just mentioning that he had noticed a lot of visitors coming and going lately, and Owen said it in a way that made it clear he did not believe the visits were innocent, but he did not accuse me directly, did not start a fight, and somehow that was worse than if he had just exploded, because his calm acceptance felt like he was giving up on me, on us. And I told myself that I did not care, that if he was not willing to fight for me, then he did not deserve me. But deep down, I felt the first real stirrings of fear, the sense that I might be losing control of a situation I thought I had mastered. The invitation to the rooftop bar came from Claudia, though I could tell she was hesitant when she asked if I wanted to join the group, as if she was not entirely sure it was a good idea to include me after our awkward conversation earlier in the week. But I said yes immediately because I needed to get out of the apartment and away from Owen's increasingly uncomfortable silence, and I told myself that a night out with friends was exactly what I deserved after working so hard and dealing with so much judgment from people who did not understand my situation. The bar was one of those trendy places downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and an outdoor terrace that overlooked the river, the kind of venue where young professionals gathered on Friday nights to drink cocktails and take photos for Instagram, and I spent extra time getting ready, choosing an outfit that I knew would get attention, doing my makeup carefully and styling my hair in loose waves that made me feel attractive and confident and completely in control. Owen was putting Maeve to bed when I left, and he asked where I was going and who would be there, and I told him it was just a work thing, a casual gathering with some people from the office, and he nodded without saying much, though I could see something in his expression that looked like resignation, as if he had stopped expecting me to tell him the truth and had decided it was not worth the effort to ask for it anymore. I kissed Maeve goodnight and told Owen I would not be too late, which was probably a lie, but one I told myself I believed, and then I grabbed my purse and headed out into the cool evening air, feeling a rush of freedom that came from leaving behind the weight of responsibility and expectation, even if just for a few hours. When I arrived at the rooftop bar, The place was already crowded with people standing in clusters near the railing, drinks in hand, laughter and music floating through the air. And I spotted Claudia and a few others from work near the bar, along with some people I recognized from other campaigns and industry events, and I made my way over, feeling eyes on me as I walked, enjoying the attention in a way that made me feel powerful and desired. Jasper was there too, which I had not expected but also had secretly hoped for, and when he saw me he smiled and waved me over, standing near the edge of the terrace with a beer in his hand and his jacket slung over the railing, and I went to him immediately, feeling a thrill of excitement that I told myself was harmless, just the natural pleasure of being around someone who appreciated me. We talked and laughed, and he bought me a drink, something fruity and strong that made everything feel lighter and easier, and I could feel the alcohol loosening the tension I had been carrying for weeks, making me bolder and less careful about how I acted or what I said. And at some point Jasper's arm ended up resting casually near my waist, not quite touching but close enough that everyone who looked at us would know there was something between us, something that went beyond simple friendship. Claudia was watching from across the terrace, her expression hard to read, and I could see a few other people glancing over at us, whispering to each other, but I did not care because I was tired of living my life according to other people's rules and expectations, tired of pretending that I was happy in a relationship that offered me nothing but stability and routine. And I told myself that if Owen had really wanted to keep me, he would have done something about it years ago instead of just assuming I would wait around forever. Someone in the group asked where Owen was, why he never came to these events, and I felt a spike of irritation at the question because it implied that I needed his permission to be here, that I was somehow incomplete without him standing beside me, and I laughed and said that Owen was not really the social type, that he preferred to stay home and do boring things like watch television or work on his laptop. And a few people chuckled awkwardly, and then someone else, one of the louder guys from the marketing team, said something about how I must get bored being with someone so quiet, and I felt the alcohol and the attention and the validation all mixing together, and before I could stop myself, I raised my glass and said loudly, with a kind of reckless confidence that I would later regret, but in that moment felt completely justified, that there was no ring on my finger, that as far as I was concerned, everyone still had a chance, and the group around me erupted in laughter and cheers, some people clapping, others raising their glasses in a toast, and I felt a surge of triumph, as if I had finally said out loud what I had been thinking for months, as if I had claimed my freedom in front of everyone and dared anyone to challenge me. Jasper laughed too, his arm sliding a little closer around my waist, and he leaned in and said something about how refreshing it was to meet someone so honest and unafraid, and I felt validated and seen and alive in a way I had not felt in years. And I did not notice Owen standing near the bar, a drink in his hand that he had barely touched, his face completely blank as he watched the scene unfold. And I did not see the way Claudia turned away, shaking her head, or the way two other people pulled out their phones and started recording, capturing the moment for Instagram stories and group chats, because I was too caught up in the attention and the laughter and the feeling of being the center of something exciting and rebellious. Owen set his drink down on the bar without finishing it, turned and walked toward the elevators without saying a word to anyone, and I only noticed he was gone when someone asked where he went, and I shrugged and said he probably got bored, that he always left early, and I told myself that it did not matter, that he was overreacting and being dramatic, and I stayed for another hour, drinking and dancing and taking selfies with Jasper and a few others, posting them to my Instagram with captions about living my best life and refusing to settle, and I felt like I was winning, like I had finally broken free from the cage of expectations that had been holding me back. And I did not think about the consequences or the cost, did not think about the fact that everyone who had been there would remember what I said, would repeat it to others, would share the videos and screenshots until the moment took on a life of its own. By the time I finally left the bar, it was past midnight, and I took a rideshare home, my head buzzing with alcohol and adrenaline. And when I walked into the apartment, everything was dark and quiet, and I assumed Owen had gone to bed. But when I peeked into Maeve's room, I saw him sitting on the edge of her bed, his hand resting gently on her hair, and she was awake, her eyes wide and confused, and I heard her ask in a small, uncertain voice why Mommy was laughing so much in the videos people were showing at school pickup. And Owen whispered something to her that I could not hear, something soft and comforting, and he hugged her close, and I saw his shoulders shake just slightly, and I backed away from the doorway, a cold wave of something I did not want to name washing over me, but I pushed it down and told myself that Owen was being manipulative, that he was turning our daughter against me by acting like I had done something terrible when all I had done was tell the truth, and I went to bed angry and defensive, my phone lighting up with notifications from people who had seen the videos and were commenting and sharing, and I silenced it and closed my eyes, determined not to feel guilty for living my life the way I wanted. The weekend after the rooftop incident was supposed to be quiet and uneventful, just another ordinary Saturday and Sunday spent doing laundry and running errands and trying to keep Maeve entertained. But on Sunday morning, Owen reminded me that his mother Rita had invited us for lunch at her duplex across town, and I felt my stomach tighten with dread because I knew that Rita had probably seen the video by now, that someone in the family or one of her friends from the neighborhood had forwarded it to her, and I was not looking forward to facing her judgment and her thinly veiled disapproval, which she always delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I considered making an excuse, claiming I had work to catch up on or that I was not feeling well, but Owen said that Rita had specifically asked for all of us to be there and that Maeve was excited to see her grandmother, and I could tell from his tone that he was not going to let me back out of it. So I agreed with a sigh and spent the morning getting ready, choosing an outfit that was modest and appropriate, trying to look like the kind of daughter-in-law that Rita would approve of, even though I knew it was probably too late for that. We drove to Rita's house in near silence, Maeve chattering in the back seat about a school project she was working on, completely oblivious to the tension between Owen and me. And when we pulled up to the duplex, I saw that Owen's younger brother Daniel was already there, his car parked in the driveway. And I felt another wave of anxiety because Daniel had always been polite to me but distant, and I suspected that he had never really liked me, had never thought I was good enough for his brother, and now he would have even more reason to judge me. Rita greeted us at the door with her usual formality, hugging Maeve warmly and kissing Owen on the cheek, and when she turned to me, her smile was tight and cool, and she said hello in a voice that was perfectly polite but completely devoid of warmth, and I followed the family inside, feeling like I was walking into a trap. Lunch was set up in the dining room, a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, and we all sat down at the table, Maeve sitting between Owen and Daniel, and Rita at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her as she said, "Grace," and I bowed my head and tried to look respectful, even though I felt like every eye in the room was on me, judging me, waiting for me to say or do something that would confirm everything they already believed about me. The first part of the meal passed in uncomfortable small talk, Rita asking Maeve about school and Daniel talking about his job, and I tried to contribute to the conversation, but every time I spoke I felt like my words fell flat, like no one was really listening or cared what I had to say, and I could feel the tension building, could sense that something was coming, and I just wanted it to be over so I could go home and escape the suffocating weight of their silent judgment. It was Rita who finally broke the silence, setting down her fork and looking directly at me with an expression that was calm and controlled but absolutely cold. And she said in a quiet, measured voice that she had seen a video that had been circulating online, a video from a bar where I had made some comments about my relationship with Owen, and she said that she wanted to understand what I had meant by those comments, wanted to know if I was serious or if it had just been a joke. And the way she said the word joke made it clear that she did not think it was funny at all. I felt my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, and I tried to laugh it off, saying that it had just been a silly comment, that people were making a bigger deal out of it than it needed to be, that I had been drinking and just trying to be funny, and Rita looked at me for a long moment, her expression unchanging, and then she said quietly that she did not find it amusing, that jokes were supposed to make people laugh, not hurt them, and she asked me at whose expense I had been joking. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, to explain that I had not meant to hurt anyone, but the words caught in my throat because I could see Owen sitting across from me, his face carefully blank. And I realized that he was not going to defend me, was not going to tell his mother to back off or to give me a break. And that silence felt like a betrayal, felt like he was choosing his family over me, and I felt a surge of anger that made my hands shake. I said that I did not think I needed to explain myself, that what I said at a bar with my friends was my own business, and that I was not going to apologize for being honest about how I felt. And Rita's expression hardened, and she said that honesty without kindness was just cruelty, and that she had raised her son to expect respect and partnership in a relationship, not public humiliation. And she said that if I could not give Owen that basic respect, then I was not welcome in her home, not while she had anything to say about it. The room went completely silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a physical presence, and I looked around the table, expecting someone to come to my defense, expecting Daniel or even Owen to tell Rita that she was being too harsh, but Daniel just looked down at his plate. And Owen sat perfectly still, his eyes on his mother, and he did not say a word, and I felt a wave of humiliation and rage wash over me, and I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up, saying that I did not have to sit here and listen to this, that I had done nothing wrong, and that if they wanted to gang up on me and make me the villain, then I would just leave. And I grabbed my purse and walked out of the dining room, through the hallway, and out the front door, slamming it behind me, and I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing hard, waiting for Owen to follow me, to tell me that his mother was out of line, to choose me over them. But he did not come. I waited for almost 10 minutes, standing by the car in the driveway, and finally, I pulled out my phone and called a rideshare, because I was not going to stand there like a fool waiting for someone who clearly did not care enough to come after me. And I left. And I spent the rest of the afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, scrolling through social media and trying to convince myself that I was right, that they were all being unreasonable and old-fashioned, that I deserved better than a family who judged me for being honest and independent. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a gnawing sense of unease, a sense that maybe I had gone too far, that maybe I had burned a bridge I could not rebuild. But I pushed that thought away and told myself that if Owen really loved me, he would come home and apologize, would tell me that he had stood up to his mother and defended me, and that everything would go back to normal. When I finally got home that evening, Owen was already there, sitting on the balcony in the fading light, and I could see through the glass door that he was looking at something on his laptop. And when I went outside to confront him, to demand an explanation for why he had not defended me, I saw that he had a thin binder open on the table, labelled Statements, in neat handwriting, and there were papers inside, bank statements and printed emails and other documents I could not quite see, and when I asked him what it was, he closed the binder calmly and said it was just household paperwork. Nothing I needed to worry about, and his voice was so flat and emotionless that it frightened me more than any argument would have, because it sounded like he had already made a decision, like he had already started moving forward without me, and I did not know how to stop it. The next morning, Maeve sat at the breakfast table swinging her legs and eating her cereal, and she said in her innocent, curious voice that Grandma Rita had told her she could stay at her house any time she wanted, that there was a special room just for her with new toys and books, and I felt a flash of anger and panic, and I demanded to know what Owen had been telling his mother, what kind of things he had been saying to turn her against me. And Owen looked at me across the kitchen, his expression calm and distant, and he said that he had not said anything, that Rita made her own decisions, and that if I had a problem with how people were reacting to my behaviour, then maybe I should think about why they were reacting that way. And then he picked up his keys and his phone and left for work, and I stood there alone in the kitchen, feeling like the walls were closing in, like I was losing control of a situation that I had always believed I could manage, and for the first time I felt a real stirring of fear, not just about what Owen might do, but about what I had already done to myself. The days following the confrontation at Rita's house felt strange and unsettling in ways I could not quite name, as if the ground beneath me had shifted and I was struggling to find my balance. And the most unnerving part was not that Owen was angry or loud or accusatory, but that he had become almost completely silent, moving through the apartment like a ghost, polite and distant and utterly unreachable. He stopped arguing with me entirely, stopped asking questions about where I had been or who I had been with. And at first I told myself that this was what I wanted, that his silence meant he had finally accepted the reality of our situation and stopped trying to control me. But as the days passed, I began to realize that his silence was not acceptance. It was something else, something far more deliberate and final, as if he had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. I noticed small changes in his routine that I tried to dismiss as insignificant, but that kept nagging at me, demanding my attention even when I tried to ignore them. He started going to bed much earlier than usual, claiming he was tired from work, and then I would hear him get up in the middle of the night and move quietly to the guest room. And in the morning I would find the bed in there slightly rumpled, as if he had spent the rest of the night there. And when I asked him about it, he said he did not want to disturb me with his restless sleep, but I knew that was not the real reason, that he was creating distance between us, building walls that I could not scale. He moved his wallet and keys to a different spot in the apartment, no longer leaving them on the kitchen counter where they had always been. And he started keeping his phone face down and always within reach, charging it on his nightstand instead of in the living room. And whenever a call came in, he would walk into another room to answer it, closing the door behind him. And I could hear his voice through the walls, low and steady and businesslike, but I could never make out the words. One afternoon I came home early from work and found him in the parking garage stairwell, standing on the landing between floors with his phone pressed to his ear, and I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden from view, and I listened as he spoke to someone in a tone I had never heard him use before, calm and measured and completely devoid of emotion. And he said something about bringing everything on Tuesday, about having all the documentation ready, and he said that he understood the timeline, and that he would make sure everything was in order. And then he ended the call and stood there for a moment in silence, and I quickly backed away and pretended I had just arrived. And when he came back upstairs, he greeted me with the same distant politeness he had been using for days, and I asked him who he had been talking to, and he said it was just a work call, nothing important, and I did not believe him, but I also did not know how to challenge him without admitting that I had been eavesdropping. The financial changes started around the same time, small things at first that I might not have noticed if I had not been paying attention. Owen began insisting that we split certain bills more clearly, writing down who had paid for what and keeping track of expenses in a way he had never done before. And he opened the mail alone, taking it into his office and sorting through it methodically before bringing me anything that had my name on it. And when I tried to look at the bank statements, he said he was organizing them for tax purposes, that he was making sure everything was documented properly, and he filed them away in a locked drawer in his desk. And I told myself that he was just being overly cautious, that he was probably stressed about work or money, but deep down I knew that something bigger was happening, something I could not quite see but could feel gathering force around me. He stopped engaging with my friends and my social life entirely, declining invitations to events I had planned, saying he was too busy or too tired, and when Jasper texted me suggesting we all get together for drinks, Owen said he had other commitments and that I should go without him. And I did. But the evening felt hollow and uncomfortable because people kept asking where Owen was, and I could see in their faces that they knew something was wrong, that they had heard about the rooftop video and the family drama, and I felt judged and exposed in a way that made me defensive and angry. Claudia was there, and she was polite but distant, and when I tried to talk to her alone, she said she did not want to get involved in my personal life, that she had said everything she needed to say, and I accused her of being judgmental and hypocritical, and she just shook her head sadly and walked away. And I left the bar early, feeling isolated and misunderstood. And when I got home, Owen was already asleep in the guest room, the door closed and locked from the inside. Maeve started asking questions that I did not know how to answer, innocent questions that cut deeper than any accusation could have. And one night at dinner, she asked why Daddy was sleeping in the other room, and why he seemed so quiet all the time, and why we did not do things together as a family anymore. And I tried to explain that Daddy was just busy with work, that everything was fine. But she looked at me with those wide, serious eyes and said that Grandma Rita had told her she could stay at her house whenever she wanted, and that Grandma had a special room set up just for her. And I felt a surge of panic and anger, because I knew that Rita was trying to pull Maeve away from me, was positioning herself as the stable, loving alternative to a mother who was too selfish and irresponsible to put her daughter first, and I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But instead I forced a smile and told Maeve that Grandma was just being nice, and that she did not need to worry about anything. Owen took Maeve on a weekend trip without me, a sudden, unplanned excursion to the coast that he announced on Friday evening, saying they would take the ferry and spend the weekend exploring beaches and visiting an aquarium. And when I objected, when I said that I should come too, that we should go as a family, he said calmly that he thought it would be good for him and Maeve to have some time together, just the two of them, and that I was welcome to enjoy a weekend to myself. And there was something in the way he said it that made it clear I was not actually welcome, that this trip was deliberately excluding me. And I was furious, but also powerless, because I could not force him to take me, could not demand that he include me when he had clearly decided that he did not want me there. They left on Saturday morning, and I spent the weekend alone in the apartment, scrolling through social media and seeing photos that Owen posted of Maeve laughing on the ferry, building sandcastles on the beach, her face bright and happy in a way that made me feel sick with guilt and jealousy, and I tried calling him several times, but he only responded with brief text messages saying they were fine and that they would be home Sunday night. And I felt more alone and isolated than I had ever felt in my life. When they returned, Maeve ran to me and hugged me and told me excitedly about everything they had done, and I held her close and tried to feel happy for her. But all I could think about was the fact that Owen had planned and executed an entire weekend without me, that he had shown Maeve that life could be happy and fun and peaceful without me in it. And I looked at him over Maeve's head and saw that his expression was calm and distant, and he did not look angry or vindictive. He just looked like someone who had already moved on, who had already accepted that our relationship was over and was simply waiting for the formalities to catch up with reality. That night, after Maeve was asleep, I tried to access Owen's laptop, telling myself that I had a right to know what he was planning, that I needed to understand what was happening. But when I opened it, I found that the password had been changed and the desktop was clean and organized, with only a few generic folders visible, and one folder labelled Oak Street Documents that required a second password to open. And I tried several combinations: our anniversary, Maeve's birthday, his mother's name, but nothing worked. And I sat there staring at the screen, feeling helpless and frightened. And I realised that Owen had been preparing for this, had been quietly and methodically building something that I could not see or touch or stop. And when he came into the room and saw me at his computer, he did not get angry, did not accuse me of invading his privacy. He just closed the laptop calmly and said that if I needed to use a computer, I could use my own. And then he took the laptop and put it in his car. And I knew that I had lost whatever small amount of control I thought I still had. I sit in the cafe, feeling the chair pretend to forgive me. The petition stays open and the pages look colder than marble today. Beside it, my phone lies face down, stubbornly quiet, refusing my touch. Through the window, I see the lobby where they watched me served. The receptionist's smile, the guard's pause, and my co-worker's stares replay. I call Owen again, hearing voicemail greet me like a locked door. I text him to talk privately, and the read receipt answers instead. On Instagram, the rooftop clip returns, captioned as if I am cruel. I dial Jasper, and the ringing stretches while the river horn groans outside. In that sound, I understand my joke has become evidence against me.